What if I told you that complacency is contagious, but so is excellence, and that the path to high performance has the same starting point as complacency? Each day you get to make a choice. Do you do the hard, risky work or not? This decision has the same incremental value. It either represents a step toward what you want to create or a step back from what you already have. It's one day at a time. It's not about being perfect, it's about consistency, making mistakes, and learning from them. Believe it or not, it's about embracing the failures instead of dreading them. This week on Breaking Sales, we conclude our eye-opening conversation on the psychology of high performance with Dr. Eric Potterat and Alan Eagle, authors of Learned Excellence, Mental Disciplines for Leading and Winning from the World's Top Performers. In this final installment, Doc talks about the mindset of becoming comfortable with being incrementally uncomfortable. I know, sounds crazy, but think about it. You would never try to eat an elephant in one bite. And Alan reminds us of the importance of how to fail and fail well. That failure is the path to achieving what you want to achieve. Eric and Alan also share the recommendations on how you can take your first steps toward high performance, providing some surprisingly simple strategies that can make a huge difference. Let's get started. I'm getting a little geeky here on it, but right, if someone can have the strength to ask themselves after a meeting as a leader, right, or a sales meeting, right, if someone can have the strength to ask themselves, what did I learn here, right? There's the curiosity, correct? Right, there's a flavor of curiosity there. A flavor of reflective thinking, hopefully, right? But going through that thought process, is that a part of adversity tolerance? When you can sit back and say, okay, what did I learn from this mistake? What did I learn from this failure? Does that help with the adversity tolerance, or am I stretching?
No, I don't think it's a stretch at all. I think so. I mean, I think by and large, you're improving by learning from those hopefully micro failures. I mean, I think, look, what we want to avoid are these enormous macro failures, right? And they happen in life too. But ideally, these micro failures allow you to kind of hone and to learn incrementally and relatively pain-free. But I think it's being open to that feedback as well, like that self-feedback, the feedback from others. That openness is, whether we call that growth mindset, whether we call that challenge mindset versus threat. I think it's, semantically, I don't care about what we call it. It really is, am I open to kind of learning and making. I think Derek Walker, there was a person we interviewed in the book. He was a Nike executive at the time. I think he's still there. I don't know. But my point is he used this word that I really like, pivot. Can I learn from these things and maybe not necessarily have to pivot my entire career, but make these pivots to, how am I going to handle my next business meeting, my next sales conversation, my next at bat, my next series of downs in the NFL? How am I pivoting to learn constantly and incrementally? So.
Well, Derek was I'm glad you brought up Derek, Eric, because we're talking about some big failures. Like Derek was a minor league ball player, and finally, his dream was to play major league ball, and he didn't make it. Okay, so that's a pretty big failure. And part of we look at what can we learn as far as why did we fail? How can we get better? But part of what Derek would talk about is, okay, what did I love about that experience that I want to replicate elsewhere? I loved how hard it was. I loved the teammates, and he tried to find similar environments in whatever his next endeavor was. So it was an interesting take. Another thing, back to your question, Dan, about failure. I talked earlier about how these mental disciplines of individual performance, I believe, are also the exact same mental disciplines of cultural excellence in companies. And if you look at the really good companies, one thing they're really good at, and I worked at Google for 16 years, one of the, an excellent company, especially at the time, the company failed very well. And what I mean by that is it learned from the failure. What can we learn from that? And some of Google's best products today are results of earlier failures. Two, it acknowledged failure. So you don't throw good money after bad, which is especially a tendency in an organization where it's some people's jobs to make something successful. They're going to keep trying no matter what. No, culturally, it's got to be okay to say, nope, that was a failure. And three, don't stigmatize it. So the people that have failed are actually celebrated because they tried something hard and they failed, but they learned from it. And this is this is a individual discipline, but also a cultural discipline. And why does that reduce stress? Because it makes it okay to take those risks. It becomes part of the culture of, actually go try new things. Go ahead. It's okay to fail. That's part of the culture. So I think it's a critical aspect of having an innovative and successful company.
In the book, we talked about kind of a three-pronged approach there. What we do well, what we didn't do well, or what can we do better, and most importantly, what are the processes in place that we can put in place to make sure or ensure that that doesn't happen again. So what do we do well, what didn't work, and then what are the processes? I think that's a really nice stamp approach to really, I think, to speak to what Alan's talking about as well.
Except it's hard to have a process in place to innovate and try new things. That's, companies try that. Suggestion box or, come up with, ways to come up with new ideas. That becomes a little more cultural,
Sure.
Which is just that you have individuals have the freedom to take some of those initiatives.
On this topic, gentlemen, what we try to do, and I love this topic because if you're going to get great at anything, right, you got to work through the bad to get to the good. Like I don't know how to play the guitar, but if I start playing today, I'm going to play bad, and you guys aren't going to want to listen to me, but I'm going to be a bad guitarist. But through process and commitment, right, grit, I got to work through that bad if I want to get to the good. And I have to be okay with that, right? I mean, I have to just be okay. Like, okay, this is part of my process. This is part of my, my journey. So I have to be okay with that discomfort. And I think that's the same in, our expertise is sales, but I think it's the same in leadership. It's the same in sales, right? It's how you handle your conversations. It's how you listen. It's questions that you're willing to ask, right? It's the observations that you're willing to make. You got to work through it, right, to get that rhythm, get to the good.
There's that gray area comfort zone, or discomfort zone, I should say. We all kind of live in this comfort bubble, right? We figure it out, whether that's business,
Sure.
whether that's what we kind of find our routine and our happy place, and we can function relatively well within that. But when you look at these performers, this theme keeps coming up, right? We've talked about this earlier in this podcast, is am I willing to kind of work a little bit outside of that comfort zone incrementally? Where people, I think, make the mistake is they try too much too fast. They think they're going to be Eddie Van, to use your guitar, analogy. They get frustrated if I'm not playing like Eddie Van Halen, within a month or two. That's preposterous. So I think it's really being comfortable, being uncomfortable incrementally is going to be key. So
I was going to ask you both about this. So, and Doc, you and I have talked about this too. There's a lot here, and right, there's a lot in the book. Okay. Where's a starting point? Right? Because I mean, Doc, even I remember the first time I heard you speak, I got overwhelmed because I was like, wow, that's really good. And that's really good. And I haven't thought about that. And that's somewhere I can strengthen, right? But at some point, though, it's like, okay, but how do and where do I start? How do I try to keep it simple so I can gain a little momentum? Otherwise, this is going to be too overwhelming.
Yeah. So maybe I'll take this and then I'll give it to Alan. So this is not a plug for the book. Honestly, it isn't. But we worked very, very hard. So a couple words come to mind. We only wanted to put a book together that was practical, relatable, action-based. And we did that. At the end of every chapter, there's literally an action item list, if you will, things that chapter kind of summarizes. So an action plan. And then at the very back of the book is that comprehensive action plan. Now, it's comprehensive. So if I had to take a few of them to a desert island with me, or a deserted island rather with me, I think I would start by asking the audience to figure out your goals. what are your goals? So ideate your goal. B, write them down, because we know that goals, I think you're 62% more likely to achieve a goal that's in writing. And then C, share that goal with someone else. So identify a goal, write it down, and share that goal with an accountability partner, coach, teammate, friend, loved one, neighbor, I don't care. And that statistic goes up to 76% likely. So I would say, number one, figure out what your goals are, write them down, and share them. Number two, I would say I'm going to go back to our process chapter. I think that where a lot of people make a mistake is they have too much blank space or white space in their calendars. They're letting life come to them. They literally are just like, hey, I'm floating down this river of life, and whatever happens, I'm going to work on whatever is important at the time. So that's taking a very much more passive approach to letting life dictate what's important. So my second challenge to people, to answer your question directly, where do I start? A, the goals. B, get rid of and eliminate white space. Put something in that white space. Even if it says veg time, if it says take a walk, if it says exercise, if it's in writing, it's more likely to happen. So don't let life dictate to you what's important. And then thirdly and lastly, if I had to take three things to a deserted island, it would be identifying the mindsets you think you need for every role to perform optimally. So define what those 4 to 6 roles are. I'll indict myself. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a performance psychologist. The attributes and the mindset I need to perform well as a father are going to be different than the attributes that I need to perform well as a speaker, as a performance psychologist. I need to be a good listener. I need to be patient. I want to be a teacher. With my wife, it's going to be markedly different as well. So identify the mindsets you think you need for each role. I think those three things are a good place for the audience members to start.
Eric, I'm surprised you didn't say the values credo.
Yeah, I don't want to amen. I mean, that's where we normally start with our work, but sometimes that gets intimidating, and it's a little bit, the reason I didn't is it's a deeper dive. A lot of people will be like, oh, I get scared kind of looking at myself by myself kind of thing. So I don't know. I'm just trying to give people very simple things to kickstart. But yeah, writing a credo, of course, that's going to be important.
I remember the white space one for our listeners. So I know innately if I throw too much organization at myself in the past, especially on my calendar, I would feel overwhelmed. And I actually, Doc, you and I have talked about this. Years ago, probably 2 or 3 years ago, I felt like I was losing freedom if I had too much on my calendar. But now I do look at it like I'm gaining freedom. And so for our listeners, look, if you fall into that category where you feel like, too much on your calendar is going to handcuff you and you're going to lose your freedom, stick with it. What you'll find is actually it's the opposite. You truly do gain freedom the more disciplined you are on where you spend your time and alleviating that white space. So that was a big learning for me as well. I had to make that shift.
Yeah, when we're saying time management and calendar management is so important, it doesn't mean book your day every day with meetings, tasks, and so on. You may put aside, 2 hours to as whatever comes up. You could plan that. You could put aside 2 hours of relaxing. You could certainly put aside 2 hours of taking the kids to the park. It's just be mindful about that. Let's say you've put aside 2 hours on a Tuesday to handle whatever comes up. Something comes up Monday morning. You go, I got time for this on Tuesday. It's already on my calendar.
It's a great point, Alan, because downtime does matter, right? It's recouping and how you recoup yourself and how you build your energy and your tolerances back up, right? So it's a very important factor here.
Well, our fifth discipline is balance and recovery. And the key practice there is to invest time in the multiple pillars of your life. Invest time in health, invest time in spirituality, invest time in hobbies. And, so many people, I'm sure among your listeners, are just like, I have no extra time. I got time for my job and time for my family. And we challenge that. I bet if you look over the next month, there's white space in there where you can fit in a workout. You can fit in, a walk where you think about the meaning of life. There is time. You just have to be disciplined about it.
Love those walks. All right, I'm going to ask you guys a question. All right. What, one each, just one each. I'll use the word. I don't know what the right word is, though. The biggest misnomer about high performance. What's that one thing that you would say is the biggest misunderstanding of high performance?
Maybe I need to change my answer because I think I've hinted at this before. I think the biggest misnomer is that people are born that way. Somehow this is like fate, it's genetics. So I just don't, I think that's the one that I think is absolutely patently false. Yeah.
I knew Eric was going to say that. So I'll go back to thinking about cultural excellence and how, if you think about when people think about what are excellent cultures, that's not actually a misnomer, or I forget what your question was, but I mean, everyone says, okay, cultural excellence is the most important thing. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. You'll hear venture capitalists say.
Yeah.
I think the misnomer is, what is culture? How do you define an organization's culture? Because you think about that, and you're like, well, it's kind of, I know it when I see it. Well, that's why I think our disciplines actually apply to cultural excellence as well. Cultural excellence is when you understand really good values. Cultural excellence is when you have a mindset of grit and growth. Cultural excellence is when you focus on process, not outcome, and so on. So I think that's a slightly different take on your question, but people understand that culture really matters when it comes to organizational excellence. This goes to the next level of what is culture and how do you practice it.
Anything else you guys would add that maybe we haven't discussed, or is there a particular topic that you feel like might be worth at least mentioning that we haven't touched on?
I'm going to go off script here a little bit and give a secondary answer to my obvious one, which was when you asked about the biggest misnomer, which I think obviously I've stated many, many times. The thesis of the book was like, hey, this is all learned. But I actually do also believe, and this is going to be a bit of an eyebrow raiser, I believe that non-excellence or complacency is contagious. I really do. Now, do I mean biologically contagious, like you're going to catch some virus? No. But it's that old adage, tell me who your friends are, tell me who your acquaintances are, and I'll tell you who you are. So I do think that if you want to be excellent and you're hanging out or surrounding yourself with people who aren't like-minded and aren't moving towards continuous improvement, they don't have to be relentless about it. They have to be aggressive about it. But I do think this complacency and, I'm just going to kind of settle, is a contagion. It is a hell-bent contagion. So I think that would be another answer I would give. I think the misnomer out there is, I don't know many people who have been successful who are surrounding themselves with people who aren't like-minded. I don't know.
So the complacency, right? That reflects on someone's standard for themselves, correct? And I don't mean standard for themselves as a bad judgment, but right, if I become complacent, it's because in my head I have reached the high standard for myself. And so I look at it subconsciously as, why would I push myself potentially any further? I've maxed my performance, right?
Yeah,
But if
I think that's
surrounding. Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Eric. No, go ahead.
No, that's very well stated. I think Alan and I, through these interviews we did as well, when you kind of unpack the history of a lot of these performers, many of them plateau. Like, they win a gold medal or win a world championship or whatever it may be. It gets really easy to be like, now what? Now what do I do? So there are ages and stages and plateaus where I do think people have to challenge themselves to, brush that off and say, okay, that's now in the past. We popped the champagne. We enjoyed it while it lasted for a moment or two or 10. But now we need to continue as, in that word that Alan used earlier, is I think perfect. It's potential, like this relentless pursuit of like, okay, I'm going to keep pushing those bounds a little bit more.
Yeah, the game can change, the arena can change, but the disciplines, I have many friends who are entering retirement, and so the arena has changed. And you want to be complacent when you're retired, or do you want to achieve excellence as being retired? Well, if you've achieved excellence before, you probably have that same desire to fulfill that potential. It's just a different arena.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also like the different role too, right, Alan? Because like if I want to achieve excellence as a dad, right? That's one arena. But then there's the arena of achieving excellence as a coach, right? Or a friend or whatever too, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Anything else that you guys would want to add to the discussion that we haven't, like I said, hit on?
I'll just add that just the journey of writing this book. Again, we talked to 35, 36 remarkable people, Navy SEALs, athletes, entertainers. Just, it was a thrill for me to even be, on a Zoom call with these people. And yet, it sounds sort of silly, but they're all human. They all have human doubts. They all have human stress response and adversity. So many people who you just kind of wouldn't think would be talking about this stuff are constantly talking about this. This is how they think all the time. They practice these disciplines, even the top performers. That's how they got there. It really is true.
Alan, you just mentioned something so important, and we didn't really talk about it, right? But it's the self-talk. You guys did mention it, right? But we do have doubts, and we do question ourselves, right? But it's that self-talk, right, that we work ourselves through it. That's such a huge, important factor.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we have a really nice, a really nice paradigm in the book, the ABC model, not to have to throw some light where it needs to be thrown, with Albert Ellis's old cognitive behavioral rational emotive therapy model that we've adopted for high performance. And it really is, when you look at the best performers in the world, of course, they all have doubts. There's imposter syndromes, there's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things they have in common is they are able to slow that process, and they look for evidence of why they're thinking that way. And most of the time, when they're dealt with a negative reaction, about 94% of the time, according to the research, it's based on irrational thoughts. So how do we make irrational more rational? And it's taking the time to take that tactical pause, slow that process down, and say, hey, just because I failed one sales call, or I failed one at bat, or I dropped a touchdown pass, it doesn't project to me as a failure any at all predictive of how I'm going to do the next time. So yeah, self-talk is a huge.
Can you just briefly mention to our listeners 10,000 foot view? Because I've heard it, seen it, read about it, the ABC model that you had just mentioned.
Yeah, the ABC model is, again, adopted from Albert Ellis, who is a very famous kind of cognitive behavioral psychologist. And A stands for activating event, B stands for belief, and C stands for consequences. Let's say I give a horrible corporate talk is the activating event. My belief is I just let down my clients. I let down the listeners, the audience members. I let down myself. And it leads to a consequence of maybe being bummed out, depressed, angry, irritated, whatever it may be. So as we look at that linear model, activating event happens, causes a belief, causes a consequence. Most non-elite performers live and they bounce off in this realm forever. They live in that A. I can't believe I gave that horrible talk. They're stuck in the activating event. And until a time machine is invented, there's nothing we can do. We can only learn from that. And what is the self-talk, or what is the process we're going to make sure that we inoculate ourselves against getting derailed? So the elite performers live in the B. There's a great quote that I've said many times in Shakespeare's Hamlet. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And Shakespeare or Hamlet's talking precisely about this. Like, I can get caught up in the event, or I can get caught up in how I'm going to react to that event. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, gentlemen, how would you like to see our audiences, our listeners, how would you like to see our listeners reach out to you? What's the best way for them to contact you? Whether it's about a talk, or whether it's about coaching, or whatever it might be.
We're both active on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way. There's not too many Alan Eagles. I don't think there's too many Eric Potterats on LinkedIn either. So that's one, is just, connect via LinkedIn. And as you said, certainly open to coaching and other sort of engagements. Would love to hear experiences people that are having with the book, or in the disciplines of high performance.
Yeah, I would add to that. We have obviously a website, learnedexcellence.com, www.learnedexcellence.com. And Alan and I check that all the time. And there's a whole We have kind of a speaker side of that, book sales, book orders, whatever folks want. So that's a really easy plug and play way to plug in as well. So
Yeah, it's an excellent website, I have to say.
So yeah, for our listeners too, right? This is what you're looking for. Okay. Fantastic book. Lots of great stories. And I know as just a regular guy, what I love the most is it's all about learned. You can learn to be a high performer. You can learn to get to that next level of your potential. And that's what I loved about it.
it's fun. I mean, it's got quite the legs. I mean, it's moving. I think we hit 11 countries now: China, India, Japan, Mexico, Brazil. It's pretty cool. So
that's amazing. That's amazing. Well, guys, gentlemen, thank you for being on. Greatly appreciate it. I know our listeners are going to love this and they're going to get so much out of it.
Thanks for having us, Dan. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Cheers.
thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity.
As we wrap up this 3-part series with Dr. Eric Potterat and Alan Eagle, I hope you walk away with a sense of possibility, optimism, and excitement about the potential for your future excellence. We've covered a lot of ground over these episodes. We've debunked the myth that high performance is something people are born with, exploring instead how it's a set of learned skills and disciplines that can be practiced and refined each and every day. We've learned about the power of curiosity and reflective thinking, and how to build up a tolerance for adversity. We've explored models for managing our thoughts and reactions, and learned that eliminating white space in our calendars can actually lead to more freedom, not less. Perhaps most importantly, we've learned that excellence is something any of us can achieve, regardless of our career or stage in life. In the end, it's not about being born with special talents, but about consistently practicing and improving our skills and our mindset. I want to thank Dr. Eric Potterat and Alan Eagle for sharing their invaluable insights with us. Their book, Learned Excellence, is a must-read for anyone looking to take their performance to that next level. As you move forward, I encourage you to choose one or two of these strategies that we've discussed and start implementing them in your own life. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving to be the best version of yourself. And remember, most important, it's never about being perfect. If you enjoyed this episode, you can follow us on your preferred streaming platform. And if you choose, leave a review. You have many options to listen to. We appreciate the time that you spend with us, and we would value your feedback on Apple Podcasts.